States. So what is the state of the law with respect to who do we have to serve in our roles as directors? Is it the shareholders and you more or less stop there? Or is it also these other constituencies? And why has it gotten so gray so fast?
I'll give you Delaware as a sort of baseline. It's not true, it's never been true, that your first obligation as a director of a Delaware corporation is to somehow, create the maximum profits for your stockholders. That's just fundamentally not true. Well, because the first obligation is that you can conduct lawful business by lawful means. Some people are saying, well, look at the Business Roundtable statement, which is you should have a due regard to your stakeholders, your employees, the communities in which you operate, your customers. Are they equal with your stockholders? Well, I would say under Delaware law, the answer is pretty clearly no for a following reason. Who in American corporate law gets to vote for directors? Stockholders. Not the employees, not the customers, not the creditors, just stockholders. Who gets to vote on mergers? Stockholders. Who gets to sue in derivative suits? Stockholders. That's a pretty fundamental statement of what the corporate law is about. Now, corporate law is not everything, right? They're not consumer protection laws, not environmental law, but about the relationship that the directors have to the thing, and that it is primarily focused on stockholders. Delaware corporate law is pretty clear. Everybody's trying to confuse it. It's not a legal problem as much as it is a market dynamic in how you deal with your constituency, which is why you all have a lot of interest as directors in seeing what the next steps are in this Business Roundtable thing, and actually saying to the big mutual fund companies, we applaud what you're talking about. Now start translating it into effective action and governance practices that gives us as directors some real breathing room to focus on sustainable wealth creation. We want to be held accountable for sustainable wealth creation. We know we have to have profitable companies. And by the way, our key constituency, the constituency that cares more about profits than any other, do you know who that is? It's easy. It's the workers of a company. Workers of a company know that they won't get paid over time if the company does not succeed. Those of you who have been directors for a while have heard the term caremark if you're in the U.S. context. If you're not in the U.S. context, what it means is you have an obligation as an independent director to put in place compliance systems and to try to make sure your company operates in a lawful way, which means, you typically will have situations to monitor your environmental compliance if you have other sorts of things. If you think about the focus now on sustainability, these are not really different. And one of my tips to everybody is you should never be a director of a company unless you can answer this question: how does this company make money? I mean that in the most literal sense, which is how do you bring in cash flow? Then you think about, for example, if we make a certain product, how do we produce that product? Are there environmental or other impacts in making that? Are there worker safety issues in making that? If you think about your obligations about legal compliance, they pretty much marry up with your focus on sustainability. Those things that you typically would think about with caremark, they very much go along with thing. I actually think it's very refreshing if you add the E to ESG and you have employees, then the other E things. Think about how much more effective your compensation committee might be. Which is, how many of you really know as much as you want to about how your overall workforce is compensated from top to bottom? About how large a workforce you have in comparison to others in the industry? If it's materially smaller, is it because we contract out labor? If we contract out labor, are they being treated the way our own workers will? And why is our CEO being paid so much in comparison to them? If we give that CEO another $1 million, well, that's $1,000, $1,000 bonus checks. What will incentivize our workforce more? And so what I'm saying is, I would think about, if you think about your caremark duties, if you think about using your committees, and I think you ought to be, here's the takeaway: if you have all your compliance in audit, that's a risk thing. Very few companies are built that way, and you're not sharing the load on the board. If you're allocating your risk management, your compliance things, and you're aligning, you ought to be thinking about that. How do we make money? Therefore, what stakeholders are we affecting? In what ways? What is our behavior? And then I'll leave it with this. Can you say to me, well, Strang, we can't know how we make money as to every product line. Gotcha. Know your material ones. But then as to your immaterial ones, the corporate culture should be tighter. What do I mean by that? If it's an immaterial source of cash flow, then the upside of taking any risk is much lower. As directors, as you think about this new stakeholder thing, I don't think it's really that new. You ought to be matching it up with compliance, not having separate things, and it ought to be integrated.
Next year's conference takes place at the Ritz-Carlton, Amelia Island in January. We very much look forward to seeing you there.